And I said, honey, what happened to you? She said, well, they overdosed and I died. I know my mama loved me, but I didn't know what to do when I died, and I didn't know how to find her, but I could hear her. I could hear her love and her prayers. And she said, can you tell my mama that her prayers were answered?
Well, today we're going to cover the topic of afterlife and the subject of ghosts. And by the time you're done, you're going to come to know what happens when we die, how the living can help the dead, and what ghosts really are and how we can work with them. And my guest today is Tina Erwin. She's a ghost helper, and her mission is really to help teach the living how to help the dead. So with that, Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Oh, I can't wait to dive into this one. This is going to be a fascinating conversation. I mean, I guess the first thing we should perhaps start is, get in some background, because this is the area you're in is really working with ghosts, helping ghosts ascend, helping spirit ascend from, the sort of like a caught area into the light. How did you get into that space where you're now helping people and help ghosts move into the light? How did you get there?
I spent 20 years in the Navy. I retired at the commander level. And in 1979, my husband and I moved into a house in Charleston, South Carolina. And everything in Charleston is haunted. But the house was only 18 months old. So I figured, how haunted could it be? Whoa, what an education. The house was so haunted that this ghost, and we named him Jake, would run down the hall. He would pound on the walls. He would steal things. And we were terrified. And I spent the 7 years we were there doing research to figure out, what do you do with this? And then I kind of buffed up my courage and started talking to my neighbors. Oh my gosh, the stories they were telling me. One woman would come down every morning. She had a 2-story house, and all of her furniture would be rearranged every morning.
Oh, wow.
So freaked her out, she moved. Another woman would come downstairs, and this was a new area. I mean, this was the site of the old Archdale plantation. But there was a main house, and the ruins were still on this big tract of land that a developer bought with this fabulous, 200 or 300-year-old oak trees. One guy told us that his house must have been built over the stables. He heard horses all night long.
Wow.
Nearly drove them crazy. Another woman came downstairs, and a rocking chair had been moved in front of a blank wall, which must have been a front porch or a window. And it was just rocking and rocking. And my neighbor had the same problems that I did. Things would disappear, knocking, and you could hear the pounding on the wall so hard you could hear the plaster falling inside the wall. And I called the Duke University School of Parapsychology. I'm on the East Coast. I figured, I'd ask them, what do you do with a ghost? And they said, we have not a clue. We just study it. Well, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
And I said, in addition to my job in the Navy, and, I had a new baby and everything else, I had to do something about this. And we were there 7 years, and I didn't figure it out. It took me finally being retired and studying everything I could get my hands on about death. Sounds really morbid, but it's more a physics issue. If energy is neither created nor destroyed, the energy that animates a human being, which we call the soul, has to go somewhere. When we die, we separate. We put a body in the ground, but we talk about, their soul lives on. Okay. We know that a Russian scientist created or discovered something called Carillion photography. He's actually photographed the energy of a person leaving their body at death. Yep. And he's very well known. So if we look at the science behind this, then maybe we can begin to wrap our brains around what happens. And as I got more educated on what happens as you're dying and what happens after death, I realized that the light comes, I would say, for the majority of people. But most people don't know what to do. It's not that they're bad or ignorant or wrong or evil. They just don't know. Maybe we can help them.
Yeah. That's amazing. So yeah, so it sounds like you got into this really through your own experiences, but then you educated yourself, learning what it is that happens at the point of the physical death. Is that the energy, to your point, has to go somewhere. We know that we're all made up of energy. We know that we've all got an energy body, an aura that can be captured by beryllium photography. We can see that. We can see that leaving. They've actually measured a weight of a body microscopically changing as at the time of death. So we know there's actually a weight. There's actually an energy. So we know these things actually happen. So then the question happens, or I should say, the question becomes, what then happens at the point of death? Our energy leaves. Where does it go? Most people feel that the energy goes towards a higher vibration state, towards a higher light state, but there are some people that don't reach that state. So how do you work with that?
I think that's an extremely valid point, and that's exactly what I've seen. If you were murdered, and I've certainly crossed over many people who were murdered, or you were the murderer and you were executed, does the light come? Well, I'm not there all the time, so I obviously can't see that. So maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But if that person is filled with a great deal of evil, the light is not something that's going to be attractive to them. You have people who are involved in some very dark things. I was supposed to clear a house in Tacoma, Washington. Well, we know there's a lot of human trafficking on the West Coast, up and down the West Coast. That's long been established. So I'm clearing this house, and I stumble on this woman who was near the property, but as I'm cleaning up I'm using remote viewing, I'm cleaning up her property, she comes to me and she says, "Can you see me?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I can see you." And she said, did my mom send you? And I said, I don't think so, but why do you think that? She said, because I could hear her praying for me night after night after night.
Wow.
And it sustained me. And I said, "Honey, what happened to you?" She said, "Well, it was bad at home. And I left home, and then I was kidnapped to be sold into white slavery, and they drugged me so I'd get hooked, and they overdosed and I died. I know my mama loved me, but I didn't know what to do when I died, and I didn't know how to find her, but I could hear her love and her prayers." So I brought in an angel, and I asked this angel to immediately cross her over and give her a lot of healing. Her body was pretty ravaged. And she said, "Can you tell my mama that her prayers were answered?"
Oh.
And I said, "I'm sure that when you cross over, they will help you to let her know, because that's not something that's within my ability to do." Yeah. But love transcends time and space.
Absolutely.
So although this was a sad story, in the end, it was a beautiful story.
Yeah. It always ends with the story of love, because the power of love is the most potent energy in the existence of the universe. It's like that's the highest vibration, that's the highest power, that's the highest light. And when you begin to look at everything from the entire spectrum, that's the one direction that's going to win every time. It's just that overpowering love that's going to help.
It's also a massive testimony to the power of prayer, which is carrying that person's love.
Yeah.
People go, I don't know if my prayers are answered. Well, we know in physics, no energy is ever wasted. That's karma too. We know that no energy is ever wasted. And we know that the power and the love that is sent through prayer is unbelievably powerful, and it moves through the fourth dimension. My theory, and you can see we can kind of all try this theory on, is that when you use prayer, this is the basis of string theory. You're sending an energy out along these thin cords that have connected you to someone, the string. That goes back to Akashic Records, the connection that we have to every place we've ever been, every person we've ever met, everything we've ever done. This is part of the Huna concept. It's a Hawaiian concept. But I believe that most faiths on earth have a theme and or variation of it. So if we had never been to a location, we don't have the same feeling we would have if, I used to go to the North Carolina mountains every summer when I was a little girl because we lived in North Carolina. So when I saw this devastation, it's like, oh my gosh, I was there. We went to Mount Airy and we went to Black Mountain and oh my gosh. Sure. So that connection, even though it may be 40 years ago, that still exists.
Still there. So, and to your point, it's like, prayer is the vehicle of intention. And when you set the intention, that's the energetic propulsion, if you will, that sends that energetic vehicle, the love, to its destination. Because how do you send a prayer? How do you create a prayer? You don't just sort of send it out in your head going, oh, I pray that so-and-so, or I pray that this happens. You pray from your heart. And what's your heart? Your heart is love. That's the energy. That's the intention. That's the feeling.
That is a very critical point. I really appreciate your making that point because prayer is an intention. That's exactly, very clearly what it is. That's why you have to be careful with prayer because there's such a thing as black prayer. So if someone is saying, I went to a hairdresser once and I left this lady, but she says, I'm going to put a curse on someone. Well, that's that's her intention. And, I'm going to pray that they have something bad happen to them. That's black prayer. Yeah. Or you pray that someone will change to see your point of view. Well, your intention is violating that person's free will.
Free will.
So that level of intention, when it's matched with love, that doesn't violate someone's free will. If you're sending a prayer that you pray that this person stays safe because you're sending them your love, certainly it's a karmically correct prayer.
Yeah, I hope.
Pray that someone joins your religion or they stop drinking because that's what you want them to do. It's a hard thing.
Ultimately you're praying in an effort to aid, to serve, to help, all in the benefit of the service of the other person.
That's absolutely true. And it's especially powerful with the dead. Because when a person is occupying space, even though there is actually no space in the fourth dimension, when a person is a ghost, they are influencing the living. And since this has been discussed in every country on earth, every tradition has some discussion of ghosts, then we know this is universal. Except maybe the Tibetans, because they have a pretty good understanding of exactly what to do at death. Yeah. And a good reference source is the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. It's a wonderful book. I certainly would recommend that. So if you're sending an intention out, maybe that mom with her daughter disappeared, Maybe her intention was just to let her daughter know she loved her and she wanted to keep her safe. And how do we know that that prayer didn't enable me to help her? I don't know. I
Yeah.
believe in miracles. And maybe in that moment for that soul, that was in fact a miracle.
Yeah. Exactly. So that then goes to the point of, yeah, how do you help? Let's say there is a ghost that you've encountered. Maybe you don't particularly enjoy seeing this ghost. Maybe this ghost is bugging you. Maybe there. I mean, even the example that you raised when you were down south, you've got this ghost. How do you deal with this ghost? Because most people are typically scared of ghosts. It's the old Hollywood ghost story. Like, oh no, it's it's evil. It's gonna hurt me. I don't want to deal with this ghost. What do you do?
What I would suggest is if you never heard of me or this lovely podcast and your efforts at service, if you were to say the Lord's Prayer, and at the end of the prayer, you ask that the soul be crossed over into the light of God, whatever your faith, it doesn't matter. When you're helping someone who's died, it doesn't matter what their faith was or wasn't. At that point, it's simply the service of a mortal person for a person who has died.
Mm.
I do have the benefit of this lovely podcast, then we're talking about something called the crossing over prayer. And it's on my website, ghosthelpers.com. There's a book out called the Crossing Over Prayer Book, which I have right here. And there are prayers for all kinds of methods of death. But the universal one is the crossing over prayer. And what that's designed to do is it makes a request to God to bring in an angel to access this soul and to escort them into the heaven world, no matter who they were, what they did in mortal life, or how they died, without judgment or prejudice in any way, shape, or form. Because if you're helping a ghost, it's not your job to judge them. Thank goodness. Not my pay grade. Not my problem. My job, since I chose to accept this, is to find a way to help them and then to teach anyone. You should be able to do this without having to pay a medium to do it. You should be able to do it in private and say these prayers again and again and again. And you'll feel a shift.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the timing of this, because just last night I was talking to a client, and during the conversation she was bringing up the fact that she lives in a 150-year-old house. Her house is filled with all kinds of spirits that she can see, ranging from horses to men in black hats to men in hoods to people that stare at her, that give her the willies, and she's like, these people just don't feel great. These are ghosts. I don't want to deal with them. I'm like, well, you're filled with love, so can't you talk to them and ask them to feel your love? And so what would you say to that woman who's in that old house filled with all these people and horses?
I would suggest to her that whether or not they can feel her love it's a nice thing, but maybe the most loving thing she can do is simply to cross them over. And if she has, and she's seeing a man with a hat that's been around, this is a very evil being. He's been around a very long time. And I have in the Crossing Over Prayer book, the Dark Intelligence Removal Prayer. It's actually in like 6 of the books I've written. And what that does is it brings in very powerful angels to remove these dark beings, because you can have this terrible man with a hat. You can have lower realm intelligences. They're little guys about 3 feet tall, and they're all black, and they have these red beady eyes, which that was depicted very accurately in the movie Ghost. The dark intelligence removal prayer will remove that. You can also say the prayer that clears the stacks of time. Maybe you have all of these different stacks of time. I mean, Florida has had inhabitants longer than 150 years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So before Florida was, one of the very first settlements in the New World, there were native people who lived there too. So you could have any number of people from varying stacks of time. You can say the crossing over prayer for the more current ghosts. And there is a prayer to cross over animals. Oh. And it is not unusual to see animal ghosts. And if a person was in a battle and they and their horse were killed in a battle, that bond between the rider and the horse is pretty strong. Mm-hmm. And maybe they don't know they're dead. Yeah. Sometimes maybe it doesn't matter whether you know any of that or not. But the Crossing Over Prayer book has a variety of prayers that you can use. Suppose someone took their own life in that house. There's the compassion prayer for suicide. Yeah. Maybe someone was murdered. There's the prayer to cross over souls who, had a very awful end. Yeah. They're very, very specific because they address a variety of causes of death. So that gives you many options that you can use that can cleanse your house over time. And that can make a huge difference. The other thing you can use, and by the way, sage is worthless for removing any of these beings. Really? It's great for sausage and ceremonies. But my suggestion would be use dragon's blood and open a window. You can get a resin burner, but the dragon's blood resin will remove them. And then if you want to really cleanse it, use frankincense and myrrh. Myrrh turbocharges the frankincense resin. And then when you burn those, not incense, do not use incense. It has fillers that will not be good. Those will make a huge difference in cleansing a location.
What about the difference between residual energy, let's say in a battlefield, and ghosts? Because something like Gettysburg, for example, a lot of people go to Gettysburg and they'll feel the residual energy of the space, of the trauma, of the problems and suffering that went on there, as opposed to actually feeling the presence of a person who didn't cross over. So what would the difference between those two?
A lot of times in a battle, at a battleground, the people who are fighting the battle don't know that they died. They have no idea. They were so intent on the powerful and dynamic energy of battle, they didn't even feel the bullets hit their body. Or they didn't feel the cannonball blast. I crossed over a lot of dead in Yorktown, Virginia. They had Civil War battles there and Revolutionary War battles there. And I found ghosts from completely different stacks of time there. Some of them were teenagers from Scotland who just, they were 14 and 15-year-olds. They were, recruited from an orphanage. They didn't know. I had a radio show host in Belgium take the crossing over prayer and walk through the battlefields in Europe. Wow. Day after day after day, and say the prayer over and over. He said it was so moving. He could hear these thank yous, thank yous, thank yous. It's like, is it over yet? Wow. Please tell me that it's over. I'm so tired. So if you're at Gettysburg, or you're at Vicksburg, or you're at Antietam, where 2,000 men died in one day, or you're, for instance, the state of Virginia, there were 4,000 battles in the Civil War. 2,000 of them took place in Virginia alone. Wow. And many people reincarnate from that time. And you know that because they keep reenacting the Civil War, and they keep It's like they want to resolve it somehow, but they can't. And so they keep going to these reenactments. They wear the same clothes, they're the same rank. They're reenacting who and what they were.
Interesting.
And in each reenactment, they die every time in the same way. So if you were to do a regression, you couldn't help but see that. And is it healthy for them? That's not up to me to decide. But I would say that if you are in a battleground, maybe the kindest thing you can do is to just sit at a quiet tree and just say the prayer. Because when you have a lot of ghosts, 1,000 men, let's say, I think 23,000 men died at Antietam in one afternoon. It was one of the largest casualty days that the Civil War witnessed. It was jaw-droppingly horrific. And when you're standing there and you're saying this prayer, you are basically helping the earth to heal, because the earth is managing the energy of all of the death, of the blood that went into the earth, of the trauma that went into the earth. You wouldn't want to build a house there, because that predecessor energy is very toxic, any more than you'd want to build your home over Andersonville, which was a Civil War prison. I can't think of the other prison. There were Union and Confederate prisoner of war camps. So sometimes land just needs a long, long time to heal. And if you're able to say these prayers with love in your heart, and you're doing it as a spiritual service, and you're not judging what side they were on, that's not up to us. Yeah. You are providing a kindness that goes beyond anything you can possibly imagine.
Sounds touching. It sounds like it's so moving, so compassionate. It's like the most compassionate thing you could possibly do to any other being.
It is. It absolutely is. It changes the giver and the receiver. And we know that when you cross over, there's parts of you that are so healed. The very light of God heals people, souls on multiple levels. And we know this because of the 23rd Psalm. Lo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Mm-hmm. That's the fourth dimension. You leave your body and you're not in this tangible world anymore. You don't have a mortal frame. You move with the speed of thought. Yeah. And it's dark and you don't understand where you are. And if you have the benefit of, again, this lovely podcast, you might know to request an angel to be by your side, or you might ask to be shown the light. You still have free will in that dimension. Yeah. And as the psalm goes on, which is a prayer, actually, it talks about he restoreth my soul. Surely goodness and light will follow me all the days of my existence. Well, when you cross over, that restoration, that peace, that healing, maybe you had an arduous life. Maybe you were paralyzed. Maybe you were wounded. Maybe you had a horrible childhood. I can't make that better. But if you cross over, the compassion of the light, the compassion of God, the compassion of Christ or Buddha or any of the great ones is there for every single soul.
And that's what's so amazing, because that every person who undergoes an NDE and comes back from these experiences discuss those very feelings, the incredible bliss and unconditional love that they experience as they connect either with their own loved ones or ascended masters or whomever it is that they happen to encounter. It's that overpowering unconditional love and the feeling that somehow this person is perfect, even though they don't feel that themselves. That's what's coming at them. This feeling of perfection, unconditional love, and just bliss. And that's why when they come back, they're like, I don't really want to come back. I want to stay in that state of bliss. It's too good.
I have heard that many times, and since I've crossed over a very large number of people, that light, you have to steel yourself.
Yeah.
not to step into that yourself. But that's not your job. Your job is to facilitate a doorway. In 2003, my 6-year-old niece sat next to my sister, and she said, "Mommy, I feel hot," and she died just that fast, right in front of her.
Wow.
And our whole family was just completely thrown. We'd never had a family member die. Suddenly, no one had ever known of a child who died in this way. It was just, her death was part of a cluster death in Virginia Beach in 2003. 7 children died within 30 days of each other. And they were all the same age. It was bizarre. Roughly within a year of each other. And then it stopped. They didn't know each other. They had no connection. She died of group A strep. And it can strike anytime, anywhere. And when someone you love passes away, especially suddenly, or they were murdered or they were in a terrible accident, your connection to that person is severed because they exit the body and the silver cord that connects them to the body is cut, which means they are cut from you. It doesn't stop your love, but that physical connection is now severed. And so this person can see around them people working on her body. They can see all these things. And if you're the person that's experiencing the shock of this loved one dying, your frequency drops. This is why people who are grieving frequently become ill, because your frequency drops.
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful of that situation. So I called one of my brothers and said, "Oh my gosh, this has happened." And he said, "You have to cross her over." But my frequency had dropped and I hadn't written the crossing over prayer yet. So together we crossed her over. And we could see as the light came for her, her grandfather met her. He got down on one knee because he had died 3 years before her. And he opened his arms, and the love, it's like this beam of love, like a tractor beam, just embraced her. And when that image was shared with my sister and her husband, because it was her father-in-law who met their daughter. This man adored children.
Wow.
And they live with that image, not the image of her death, but the image of her embrace by someone who loved her, that she recognized. And she was completely swept up in his love.
Yeah.
That's what lives within them. And that really helped their grief.
Exactly. That helps both the living and those in the physical and those in the non-physical. And that's what is so consistent among what you've just been talking about. People, you come back and talk about the NDEs, the experiences that we've just been discussing. They're all the same thing over and over and over again. Just kind of like physics. Physics is pretty consistent.
Exactly. And no one says, "Gee, did you go to church Sunday?" No one's questioning you. Yeah. There's nobody with a clipboard that meets you and checks these. Did you do this?
Right.
I've crossed over people who went to church 4 days a week and twice on Sunday. And they told me that God couldn't love them because they were born in sin and they died in sin.
Mm-mm.
And I said, we talk about Christ the Redeemer, and you're Christian and you love Christ to the depth of your being. Let that be your guide now that you're dead.
Yeah.
You see this light, you see that beam coming toward you, and everything transforms for them.
Yeah.
You mean God could love me? And it breaks my heart. Yes, not only can God love you, all the love that you've had for your friends, your family, your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, that energy only enhances all of those connections. Love is always the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
No matter what.
Even if you're the Beatles, that's their title. Love is the answer.
Love is the answer.
It's so true. Well, that's great. Well, Tina, this has been absolutely fabulous. If you were to talk to one listener out there today and give them one piece of advice, what do you think it would be?
I would offer them, don't fear death. Live life to the fullest. Love with a whole new view of love and how dynamic it is. And when the point of death comes, look for the light. If you encounter a ghost, use the crossing over prayer, or just ask for an angel to escort them to the light of God. Whatever name you use for God, let that be your guide. Relax, love life, love those around you. It heals you on every conceivable level.
Absolutely. So perfect, so well said. So, Tina, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you for having you, and thank you for sharing your prayer and your book. Those will all be in the show notes, so look forward to that. And everybody, thank you for joining us for another episode today. And as always, if you enjoyed what you liked, what you're hearing, by all means, just give us a like and subscribe. And with that, I'll sign off, and we will see you next time. So until then, this is Chris signing off, sending you love and light. Bye for now.